All right, episode something of the Strongfit Podcast. I was asked, welcome back. I was asked to do one about the Karl Friston stuff, like the prediction versus observation, technically the free energy principle and things like that, for not a dummy version, but for a simple version. Okay, there is no simple version of this. So I realize,
the simple version of it is experiencing it, right?
Nah, the problem is that our brain is not designed to understand certain phenomena that happen. You cannot understand quantum mechanics because, no, not you. I mean, the human.
I will not.
No, you will not, but like, when I say understand quantum mechanics, you're thinking the math. Because this is the only way we can visualize quantum mechanics is through mathematical equation. I don't understand them either. It's way too advanced for me. But the quantum mechanic itself, we cannot understand as humans. Because evolution did not give us a brain capable of visualizing that type of idea. Because it doesn't exist around you. You can only understand, and that's going to be part of what we're going to talk today, what is around you. So a lot of the prediction versus observation, when we talk prediction, you think tomorrow is going to rain. Because you think conscious, you think planning. Because that's what we do. To understand what a prediction is, it requires letting go of the idea of consciousness, of conscious thought. To understand that some parts of your body has their own prediction mechanism that is not relating to you thinking. That is very hard to do. That goes against I think, therefore I am. It's a very hard thing to do. So a lot of those concepts we're not designed to understand well. So you have to develop an intuition for that, a way of thinking about it that is very complicated. So it's almost impossible to give a simple version of it. What I can do, and I think in the past I made the mistake of doing podcasts and not going back on certain subjects that are so complicated. I did one and I'm like, I'm done. No, you need 1,000 hours just to explain one point. So what I want to do is I want to go back like this toward specific subjects that are so important, like the fatigue and freeze, like stuff like that. What does that mean for recovery, for example?
I also think it's an important point to make. I'll take myself as an example. I do this podcast. I listen to you talk every day.
You live with me?
Every day I live with him.
It's not a secret anymore, right? we sign like papers in Brazil saying like pretty much married. Like here it's the same thing. So there you go.
No, we sign papers and we officially live together.
Yeah.
Before my mom and dad freak out by watching the podcast.
Yeah, exactly.
Hi, Mom. Anyway, my point was, I'm with you every single day. I train with you. I live the thing, and it takes me so long to understand certain things, certain principles, and I still make the mistake. And I think a lot of people are with me on that. Like, the theory, still make the mistake. Takes you 1,000 mistakes to finally understand it, or a certain experience to finally understand it. So that's why.
But it's not even a mistake. It's just you're thinking at it in the wrong terms.
Yeah.
It's Voltaire who said that you do not judge a man by his answers, you judge him by his questions. Right, so he's looking at the things from a certain point of view. Yeah. But that takes so long. That's almost like I'm playing with the sound because sometimes it's a bitch because I turn toward you. Yeah. So when I speak here, it's not the same sound as when I speak here.
I'm happy you're still human and you still make mistakes. It's not just
all the time.
Makes audio mistakes.
Well, you make most of them. So there's what you have to develop is a way to look at certain things to ask the right questions. That takes years. Like I've been looking at quantum mechanics, not understanding, but like the lecture of Leonard Susskind for over 10 years now. Like I didn't know philosophy for so. It's just it takes a specific mind, and I have that type of intelligence, right? Most people do not understand Karl Friston. It just has to be established right now. You will not understand Karl Friston. It's just the way it is.
I think people just listening to the podcast, even like listening it back a few times, it sometimes also takes the right example or the right term for it to hit. So I think that's also why it's very important to do multiple podcasts
on the same subject, because maybe I'll come up with an explanation that will hit better.
That happens to me often, that there's an explanation that I'm like, oh.
But that's also because it takes 5 of them.
Yeah.
To hit, and there are levels to this.
Yeah.
So the Karl Friston stuff. So to understand prediction versus observation, first I need to explain the genius of it and where it comes from. So don't put your hair on the microphone, please. You make my life harder. So you come at it from two different perspectives. We're going to go at it from what I think is the simplest way to understand, I think. So in order to explain prediction versus observation, we need to establish what is necessary for a living entity. For a living entity to remain alive, it needs to establish what is versus what is not. To have something, you have to have something that it is not. If I have a finger, I need to have something that is not the finger. Otherwise, the finger cannot exist because everything is the same, right? So let's take a cell, right? A cell has the nucleus, the center, and then the membrane, and everything in it. I can't remember the term in English. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Yeah. But you have the nucleus, the part of the cell, and then the membrane around it. The name is going to come back, but as usual, I suck with names. So what is interesting about that cell is if you look at what is and what is not. You have the cell inside the nucleus, that's what is, and then the world around it is what is not. But what we need to understand is that the cell itself does not deal with the world.
It only deals with what is in the cell and what it is.
Well, it is with the world, but how is the cell dealing with the world? What is the way of communication with the world? It has to go through the membrane. The cell, any communication is done through the membrane for the cell. Like that's where the waste goes out, the nutrients come in, but its seeing, feeling, understanding of the world is through the membrane. So that means that the only thing a cell understands is what the world is telling the membrane. So it does not understand the world. It understands a world that is based on what the membrane is telling him the world is. It goes the other way as well. The world does not know the cell. It does not know what the nucleus is. It only knows the membrane. So that means that the only thing you know about the cell is whatever information is contained on the membrane on the outside of the cell. Mm-hmm. So that means I understand the importance of the membrane. It is everything that the world is to the cell, and it is everything the cell is to the world. Yeah. Right. That membrane, when it comes to probability mathematics, has a name, it's called a Markov blanket. That's what it is. The cell, so we looked at that, and the way the cell interacts with the universe through that membrane actually obeys the laws of probabilistic mathematics. So Markov was a mathematician, probability mathematician, who developed a set of equations to calculate specific things about mathematics, that certain things in systems, in integrated systems, of the surprise when the shit doesn't work the right way versus what was expected. So expectation versus surprise. Mm-hmm. Right. And so there's a probability mathematics that explains that very, very well. That equation happens to work with a living cell. And so when they started to see that, they went deeper and deeper, and they realized that those probabilities obey a very important role, which seems to be the second law of thermodynamics, is like the entropy always increases. So I need to make this part short because otherwise it'll take another 2 hours. The idea was that starting from that viewpoint of what is not, and the interaction of the cell with the universe, right, was the beginning of proving mathematically what life does. So what life does really is it has what he believes it to be versus what the surprise that is created. Yeah. So there's a mathematical background even to life in that sense. Right. So what the life that...
So actually life is what you make out of it, or what you see of your version of it.
Right. Well, exactly. So perception creates reality. Yeah. Because, and so we think the cell is limited, but we have to understand, and even us as humans, we do not understand the world. We have our own Markov blanket. It's not as simple as a membrane, but it's the same idea, because us, it's our senses, right? So electromagnetic events, stuff like that, but like vision, smell like this, constitutes a Markov blanket. You are not in touch with the world. You are in touch with the your own Markov blanket that tells you what the world should be like, probably is like, most likely is like in a context of your own survival. Yeah. And that is the part.
So you create your own world. And
you do.
The other part is how much of the actual world lives up to that creation.
Exactly. And so that's the key, is we have to understand, because this is life, right? We just don't create the world out of just a fancy idea. We do it to survive. So everything is going to be based on that. It's going to be like the probabilities of something happening that could threaten my survival is going to be what I'm going to focus on, where I'm going to put my attention, where my senses need to go. If something does not threaten my survival, or I do not understand them, I do not see them. They do not exist. So that means that we do not live in the universe that we live in. We live in a universe that we create for our own needs. And so it happens that we create 1 million universes like that every milliseconds, like it's just constantly, and we're trying to match it with what the world is telling us. So imagine if we are the cell, we create a bunch of ideas about the world is, and then what the world is telling the membrane is going to go, oh, that one matches this one right here. It's not the same, but it matches closer. Why? Because that universe becomes the biggest probability for my survival, and therefore I'm going to live in that universe, because from there I can create the next one that has a higher probability of surviving, and the next one, and the next one is the next one. Yeah. So it's a learning behavior necessary for survival. So our senses are designed for that. So why is it revolutionary? Because up till now we thought the senses were like, I smell something. No, you don't. You do not. You think you smell something, but that is not true. You have something coming to your nose and you're trying to figure out first if that smell is a danger to you or not. So you're going to compare it to everything that you know in order to figure out what that smell is coming from. Is it dangerous to you? What does it mean? What is the cause of the smell? So you don't smell something. Whenever you smell something, you're like, what caused it? Because that's what matters. I need to visualize what caused the smell, because I need to know if there is a threat to me or not. So you never smell the smell. You smell it only thinking what created it. Yeah. So right away changes the smell, because you might be wrong. It might be a fruit. Yeah, but it might not be. In the meantime, that smell is already gone. You're already trying to figure out why something caused that smell. That's actually what interests you in the process, is what is causing the smell, not the smell itself. So you never really put your attention on the smell itself. You only put it on the cause of the smell.
Well, it's the same thing with sound, right? Like if you hear
exactly.
a loud sound, the first thing you
what
think
happened?
is what happened,
yeah.
what's happening.
So, and this is why if you can't remember the sound.
Yeah.
It was loud, but sounds are not the same. When you listen to music, there's notes. You can tell there's notes, right? When there's a loud sound, you can't remember a loud sound. Yeah. You don't remember where it was. It's just your blam, but you don't remember what it was. Yeah. The only thing you go is like, that sounds like wood falling on the ground, or that sounds like someone falling, or that sounds, but the sound itself you barely remember, because that's not where you're putting your attention toward. So that became extremely important, because that means that we are not passive in our way. So for the longest time, we thought the brain was an antenna that is just wide open and keeps absorbing, and then from there it would tell the body, hey, signal, let's react. Well, turns out, no, it is not an antenna. It's trying to actively shape the world we're in order to give us the better chance at doing X. And then, so it is constantly trying to figure out the system and predicting what the system is going to do next, so that you are more successful in that specific area. It's trying to predict a way that would fit that idea of that physics idea, that Lagrangian mechanics of the least action. Yeah. Which is like, how do I get to this throughout the minimum amount of proper time being spent? Yeah. Right, so there's an entire thing there. And so, but that's the important part of understanding, is that the system like that is a prediction system. That does not mean is tomorrow going to rain. For example, you burn yourself, right? You put your hand next to a burner again, you'll feel almost the burn, right? This is because this is not a conscious thing. This is where we struggle with conscious versus unconscious. There are systems in place all the way to the hand that is through the nervous system that is deciding that this is hot, and as you get closer, it gets hotter, whether it's it's turned on or not. It's an entire system that is in place that is not necessarily related to the conscious thoughts.
So when you first learned about this subject, what drafted you so much toward it?
Right. So the brain is a prediction model. That's kind of easy to figure out, but that's not what the free energy principle was about. Because remember, my friend the cell, he has the same power of analytical performance as I do. So that means that the cell is capable of doing mathematical operations the best computer on this planet cannot do. So it's like a quantum computer. It's crazy in its implication. But he was going a little bit further than that. So because the free energy principle went at the root cause of what is life. That question that everybody has asked, but that Schrödinger in his book asks so clearly. And in a way, that was the answer. So what we saw through those probability mathematics is that what life does is it tries to fight the increase of entropy of a system. It tries to fight the disorder of a system. That's what was calculated. So what does that mean? You put a drop of ink in a glass of water. It spreads out until you don't see the ink anymore. That's because the ink is not alive. So it spreads out. And as it spreads out, the entropy in the glass, the amount of hidden knowledge, hidden information, the number of possibilities in the glass keeps on getting bigger and bigger and bigger until the ink disappears, and then you don't even see it anymore. That's what entropy does. Like the amount of possible configuration of a system keep increasing until everything is spread out, and then there's death because everything is gone. Imagine if I put this chair right here, right? I come back in 100 years, it's not in the same shape, it's almost broken down. 100 years later, it's gone because it's all over. And then 1,000 years later, the house is gone. So everything goes to shit, basically, over time, right? Life, its goal is the opposite, is to bring order, is to get things created. So the purpose of life would be to take my drop of ink and put it back into one drop. So it would go out, go back in, go out, go back in, almost like a breathing system. That's what life would do. It would try to bring the ink together. So that's how you know when something is alive. Because it fights entropy, it tries to bring the ink back together. To do that, it needs to calculate its environment. It needs to make a prediction of what the environment is so it can fight it more successfully. That's what prediction means. So it happens at the cellular level, at many levels. And the human body has hierarchies like that are decided from, the first hierarchy is the heart, because if the heart stops, we die. You can live without a brain. Homer Simpson did it. But you cannot live without your heart. Your heart stops, you're dead. That's the one thing. If it stops, you're dead. You can live without almost anything else, not for very long, but the heart stops, you're dead. That's it. Right. So the first hierarchy is the heart. That's the strongest signal you have in all of that symphony, is the heart. So in itself, it has its own prediction mechanism that you're not aware of. So the heart is like a great musician. It has, if you look, it can beat faster or slower, right? But it can also, like the heart is tum-tum, tum-tum, tum-tum. The battements are too. The time between those beats, right? There's a time between the big one, but there's a space between those two. That's called what they call HRV. That actually indicates a lot of information to the body about what's happening. Just that tum-tum, like the two valves, the two beats like this in between what is called a heartbeat will indicate a lot of information to the body. How much? So that would be the notes, for example, of the music. There's two notes, right? And how you play them, the silences of the music matter a lot. And then the heart can go faster or slower, so you can play those notes faster or lower, but you can also play them louder or a bit more quieter. That's the amount of blood, for example, that the heart pumps through the arteries. All that becomes a music. On top of that, there's another form of music that we're barely starting to understand, is that the heart has an electromagnetic field and a pure magnetic field that is 100 times stronger than the human brain, for example. So the heart is our first hierarchy and has its own system like that of prediction versus observation. The heart does its own thing, trying to regulate the entire system on its own. And then through the Markov blanket, the universe says something, and then there's a play between those two inside your body. Then after that, there's a cardiovascular system. That's the second hierarchy. So first you have the heart that has a prediction versus observation system. Then there's the cardiovascular system. You know, like the heart, for example, the blood being pumped through the veins. That's going to indicate some very, very specific things. You have receptors in the arteries to know how the heart is pumping the blood. That changes certain things that will trigger different stuff. So you have a prediction versus observation there. Then you go to the viscera, the stomach, the stuff, they send a different signal. And then you go up the hierarchies all the way to the eighth hierarchy, where every time there's a prediction versus observation system within it that takes the ones below it as well. So you have the heart, then you have the heart and the cardiovascular, the heart, the cardiovascular, the viscera. And it keeps going up like this to the eighth system. And conscious thoughts are around the fifth. But so every system in the human body is a prediction versus observation built on top of each other, one using controlling the ones below it. And so it turns out that you do all that and then you integrate that based on priors, what happened in the past, so that you can try to understand the system better. So the more experience you have about what is the past, the better the prediction you can make toward surviving what is happening at that moment. And then the higher you go in the hierarchy, the more you can remember the past and the better you can think about the future. Time, milliseconds versus years, that's also part of the hierarchy. So it's like playing 3D chess on an infinity of chessboard at the same time. The human body is extremely good at doing all that processing power, which is it's a monster computer in that sense. But that's very important to understand that aspect, because you need to understand that prediction is not about is it going to rain tomorrow. Yeah. It's about what are my senses telling me in order for me to have the best chance of survival, of not producing more entropy that I absolutely need to, so that I can stay alive longer, better. So it's that type of a prediction.
So that means that it's extremely harmful to yourself to forget the past, right?
For example, like if you were to truly negate priors, you would never learn, which would impose a tremendous stress on the system. Yeah. So the key is always, and there's a hierarchy especially for that, which is the last hierarchy that the evolution seems to be working on, that is toward taking negative stuff and turning them into a positive experience. And if we cannot do that, if we get stuck into what is called a default network, well, yeah, that's where trauma will live, but that's also where society will live. So that's where individualism goes to hell. Like learning behavior are affected. There's a number of things like that are fascinating that we're barely starting to understand now. So that framework of the free energy principle being predictive changed the way we looked at a number of things. So in the case of trauma or stuff like that, then what are emotions for? If you hear depression, anxiety, emotions, again, we're looking at it like an antenna. I feel an emotion. I'm passive, the emotion is there, I just feel it. Well, no, turns out you cannot just feel an emotion. That's not what you do. The emotion is there to indicate something else. So what is it indicating? The emotion is there as a part of a learning mechanism. Learning mechanism is always based on threat, because everything is designed to survive. The threat system is a sense of self. So emotion and the sense of self are obviously related, because what an emotion is there for, it's either toward the positive feels good or feels bad. So do I need more of that? Do I need less of that? That's positive versus negative. And the intensity, is it strong or is it weak, tells you, do I need to learn that right now? Or can I just put that on the back burner and learn it a little bit slowly? Which is necessary, because you can't spend too much energy constantly learning everything at the same time for everything. There has to be a hierarchy based on what is more necessary at the time.
So if you have an experience, can you name an example of an experience what brings up a very strong emotion now from the past, and how you deal with that going into the future?
So whenever you have a very strong emotion, that's your system saying, like, we need to understand this, and we need to, and if the emotion is strong, that means your system is like, it's a very important thing for us to understand for our survival. So you will understand the frustration and understanding what it means. So if there's a clash between what you think that trauma came from, memories are unreliable. Maybe you don't, you think you understand the trauma, but you can't accept the consequences of what it means, or you don't remember it correctly, actually, or.
So the emotion is more important than the actual memory.
Well, the emotion is not exist only to tell you that you need to learn from that.
Yeah.
The memory is there and is very vivid when there's a pattern that needs to be learned, so that the future you don't do that again in the future. That's what a memory is for, is to teach you patterns that you try to avoid in the future. Or try to replicate in the future to get the good stuff again.
So it's more going hand in hand.
Yeah, with all that. So they will. So some memory will bring certain emotions, but the emotion is there only to tell you to learn about this, integrate the pattern that is being put in front of you. And when some people cannot do that, the frustration goes up because the system knows the need to understand, you just cannot do it. So that's why trauma will put you in freeze, is because you're going up like crazy through the emotional, what is called emotional violence, which means there's a tremendous need to understand what happened there and deal with it. And you can't, and eventually you're spending so much energy. It is such a radical change on the system, and we'll see the lactate levels going up, like the fight mode starts to go after a while, that it becomes dangerous physiologically to the body to remain at that level. So what does he do? He puts the brakes. The brakes, we know what that is. That's a freeze mode. Boom! And then it makes you crash like crazy. So the freeze mode is interesting in that case, in the case of trauma and everything, is if you go on Instagram on Nature is Metal or stuff like that, you see animals being eaten alive, usually by hyenas. I don't like watching it, but I like watching it because it reminds me what the world truly is once you get out of the lie of civilization. And you see those animals getting eaten alive, and I'd suggest at least once you look at it. And I have a video.
Don't follow it. Like sometimes you open Instagram and you just see a rough picture and you just...
Like she's like, oh, that's just first thing in the morning, like that's a bit much,
rough,
yeah.
Or right in front of a meal. Like all of a sudden you're not hungry anymore.
Oh no, me it's not even that. It's just like I didn't want to see that.
Yeah,
like anyway, but there was that an impala or something being eaten alive, literally, like it's gnarly by hyenas, or even worse. The worst are not the hyenas. The worst are the wild dogs, because they start with usually the softer parts. So they try with the sexual parts, and then they start tearing out, and they eat from there. Oh yeah, and the thing is alive, but there's a look on the face of the impala or whatever that is completely glazed over. It's like this, it can't see, it's not screaming in pain, doesn't even look to be in pain. It's completely gone, and yet it's still alive. That's the original part of the freeze mode. Is the system went completely berserk into trying to get the most energy possible to the animal so he can take off and run away, and eventually he fails. When he fails, like we saw that with dynorphin being pumped, and you go into like a peaceful place where you're not in touch, not conscious anymore, almost, you're just gone. Most likely that impala doesn't feel anything anymore. He's just gone. The shock factor, that's what the shock is just a complete mechanism of do not feel. So that's what you see, like rape victims or stuff like that get into shock. It's because they don't want to feel what is happening, so the system shuts it off. They try to fight. When the system realizes it cannot be fought, then you go into survival mode, which is shock, I don't feel anything anymore. It doesn't mean it didn't happen. That's a problem. So as you go through life and you become stronger, and the system is like, all right, can we deal with it now? It's going to lessen the shock so that you can start to bring that memory back so that it doesn't happen again. So now you're back to when it happened, to go like, what do I do now to avoid that? Because I was in such a bad place. The problem with that is that memory is going to bring an immense amount of emotion, because that emotion is required for you to learn from it.
Must be so difficult though.
And if it's difficult enough, then you back off from it and you go back in shock. And then the only
way out of the shock is by
facing it.
And
but exposure therapy, facing it a little bit, not facing it full blown, the full core of it. You might not be ready to face something of that magnitude. And if you're not,
your issue with people who do like full releases.
Yes. Of emotions.
Of emotions where people
they
would
might not be ready.
Confronted.
And they might tell you they're ready, but they're not. And then when the whole thing hits them, they just boom. It's just too much. Yeah. So the system goes back into the freeze mode, into the shock, and now they're depressed. But you have to understand that that's what depression is at the beginning, not anymore, right? Depression became very, very subtle and complex. But at the end, depression is what? Is the impala not feeling anymore the wild dogs eating her alive. A good system. So we need that, right? That has evolved because now the wild dogs are not, they don't eat you alive like that anymore. They eat you alive with words. We don't have predators that chase us around, thank God, the streets anymore, right? What we have is we have other humans threatening us. So instead of being in shock and not feeling what the wild dogs are doing us physically, we're starting to evolve toward a system that is based on how people are impacting us socially. So we see that with social media and the impact of words and stuff like that. And when you had too much of it, at some point you realize you cannot fight, you go toward depression. Because depression is becoming a tool of detachment, just like that impala needed to detach from her own body. Yeah. So it's all the same system, and that's what depression is. Depression is just a system of detachment because the fight was being lost. Everything goes up, it just crashes down, unfortunately. And so at some point, the choice was made instead to just let go. But that starts out of a system of prediction. So that's why depression is not a disease. It does not happen to you. Depression is there as every time we do this, you go up to a physiological place that is not sustainable, so I have to bring you down. So at some point, the system is like, why fight? Every time we go, we spend energy, we're putting at risk and we lose. So now I'm just going to keep you lower and lower and lower every time because you have a better chance of survival that way. So that's why it's so important to understand the prediction system, because then we understand that everything is, what does it mean then? It means that prediction will make you see the world a certain way. Because that is the universe that you created, that you live in, where your chances of survival are higher. Yeah. A world where you don't fight. So you start to see the world as a place where you cannot win, because that's the prediction, because it's more effective at keeping you alive. So you could see how that could get you into a vicious cycle of not being able to see the world as a place where you want to live, but rather a place where you want to stay away from. That's the detachment that the depression, it's a tool, it's a function, it's not a thing. There's no such thing as depression. It's just a tool to see the world in a way that makes you give up on the fight that you shouldn't have in the first place in that particular mindset. Of course, you should have the fight, but you lost it so many times, you're like, oh, screw it. Mm-hmm. So screw it means then I lived in a world that has no interest for me to go outside, no interest for me to create fights. So I end up closing the walls more and more and more because I have a better chance of survival in that one.
So you're literally a very overly simpler fighter, of course, living your own world.
Yeah, which we always do.
Yeah.
But so that means that you.
No, but I mean,
yeah,
like,
even exactly.
Oversimplified.
Right. So that's why, like I say always, like, yeah, but it's exactly that. Like your vision of the world is actually is a sign of your character.
Yeah, that's. I find that very interesting.
Right. How you see the world is actually how do I phrase that? Is actually a representation of your character, yeah. Because you will see in the world what you are. Yeah. Jealous people are jealous because inside they would do that shit.
Yeah, but that's that phrase made me look at very judgmental people differently.
Most people that are depressed that I know, and when I say that, I mean 100% of them are judgmental people. Yeah. Because this is a gun that they point at everybody, the judgment gun. The problem is at some point that gun, you're going to point it at yourself. And you were so mean to others with that gun that when that gun turns to you, it'll be just as mean. So be careful how you treat others. Yeah. Because sooner or later, that gun will point at you. And when it does, it's going to hurt just as bad. So it didn't matter when it was them. But it's going to matter a lot when it's pointed at you. And so that's the key, is the way you see the world is a representation of yourself, of your own character. Because that is the world that you created within that Markov blanket where you have the best chance of survival. So you live in the world you created. Yeah. That's really what the prediction of observation is. And so when there's a difference between the world you live in and what the world is outside the Markov blanket, like telling you what it is, right? So the closest approximation, there's still a difference between what you want the world to be versus what it is. That's what they call a somatic error. Right. You need to deal with that, because once you have this is what I want versus this is the world, that stuff you're going to have to find a happy medium. You're going to have to solve that gap between what the observation, what your Markov blanket tells you the world is versus what you thought it was. That's somatic error. You have 3 ways of dealing with it. You can change the prediction. I was wrong, this is not what the world is. Or you can change how you feel about it. So you have 3 ways. You can if I say my arm is straight.
This is just an excuse for you to flex on YouTube.
Because it's getting bigger. My biceps are getting bigger, so I want to show.
He's doing a lot of bicep curls. Go do the
3 times a week.
Because
they're weaker. Because otherwise my shoulders hurt. You want to fix your shoulder, long head of the biceps. Anyway.
Go do the template. There's a lot of bicep curls.
Go do the template. So my arm is straight. Right. So I have 3 ways of changing that. I can go, my arm is not straight. I can go, I don't see my arm anymore. Or I can get my arm straight. So the number 1 is taking action into the world to make the arm straight so that it fits the prediction that I had. So that's the number 1 system that we have, is we're going to create a vision of the world that we predict, and when it's not exactly that, we're going to take action toward making it become that. When I mean action, I don't mean changing the world over the next 2 years. It can be looking at changing the way you breathe, changing your eye angle. Like the world is super bright. I don't want, but I don't want to live in a bright world, so I'm going to look somewhere else. Things like that will affect directly what the prediction was. So you can change the somatic error just by having an action. Again, it can be just movement. Any types of movement is taking an action toward changing that gap, toward dealing with that gap between the prediction and the observation. Yeah. You can also change the prediction, which means, well, I was wrong about it, let me process it, or you can change the way you feel about it, which means that's the 8th hierarchy, for example, turning a negative into a positive or vice versa, so that it fits that prediction that was originally made. So you put that idea into the hierarchies and you see psychology 101. If you take all this, you put it into the hierarchies, you understand exactly why we act the way we act. Do you know that when the Indians saw the conquistadores coming first, they could not see the ship that was at sea? Yeah, because they did not understand the ship.
Yeah, right. Oh.
Not that big, not like that. So they didn't see it. It's like, where are you coming from? Because they only saw them with a small ship. Like they didn't process necessarily right away. So they had to be shown on everything, and they went, oh, that exists. So now I understand what it is. Now I can see it. Yeah. We do that a lot. Blind spots are everywhere.
Yeah, but it also shows you how important your environment is and how important it is that you like your environment.
So that's
actually a very. I thought. I don't remember which podcast it was, but I think it's a very, very interesting podcast too, where you talk about how the environment influences you and how important it is to find an environment that fits you and fits your needs.
Right. So as we said, to change the somatic error, you have to take an action to make the prediction come true. So, and this is where I think one of the deepest lessons that I got out of all that is the importance of the environment on you. But not just the environment as in like, do I have a good job or stuff like that. We're talking like everything from the air you breathe to the food that you eat to the hot versus cold, the people around you, the stress at work, the training gym that you're in. From the simplest one, like the air you breathe, to the more complex is the mood at the gym that you're in. Yeah. All this has an impact on the whole system. There is no such thing as separating like this. It's a system as a whole. The system does not create, and I have a paper like that that really sharpened my way of thinking about that. It's like, you do not create, how is the gym? How is my love life? It's not that. You create a universe where all of that stuff is integrated. And then you create another million universes where everything changes constantly, and you try to find the one that fits you the best based on your observations, right? But that means that all that is an integration of things. So that means that the air that you breathe, that you won't consciously know, but that will change the way you see the world, your relationships, work, all that stuff. So in order to truly change who we are, we need to change the environment. And the bigger the change of the environment is necessary. So people that are depressed, like to change first that judgmental nature, that closed off mentality where the walls are getting closer. I need to change your entire environment. Maybe the spouse, maybe work, maybe where you live, exercises, diet. Like, don't think for a second you're going to take one thing out and then that's the key. It's going to be an entire universe that you have to change so that you change the way you look at things. That will change the gun that you point at yourself. Yeah. What matters, and that, for example, especially for depressed people, if you want to get better, is you need to change the nature of the gun that you point at people, because that gun points at you. You usually don't realize it does, but when it does, fuck, does it hurt. You need to change the nature of the gun that you point at people.
So, talking environment, a more personal question, how does your environment change from living in Amsterdam to living in Rio? Because it's a different environment.
Right.
How does your view of the world change?
For example, the culture here is very sexual, very hard, very emotional, right? But they're a lot more polite. They're a lot nicer. So you, for example, simple stuff. You're less angry here.
Yeah.
Like stuff piss you off. Don't get me wrong, especially bureaucracy in Brazil.
Stuff not working
in general. Oh my God. But people are not nearly as angry on a daily basis as the Dutch people are. The Dutch people are the rudest people I've ever met in that sense, right? Yeah. They're so angry and just scream at you stuff where you want to get into a physical fight on a daily basis. I haven't had that once here. We've been here since June. Not once did I want to go in a physical fight with someone, whereas in Holland it was every day.
And I think especially as a foreigner in Holland, I grew up in Holland, and even for me it's such a different, just like the saying hi, how are you, right. Just here, smiling.
Do you feel accepted? Do you, like for example, I walk around, I can read signs. That looks like such a small thing. It makes a big difference. Yeah. Because when you can't read signs, you always threaten.
Oh, that's how I felt the first few months in Brazil. As the first few months when I got here, I didn't know anything because we live in the jungle. I grew up in a city, and at first I would walk, like I would look where I walk because I was scared there was like a cockroach or
there was. But
as soon as you get used to it, you change your view
right, but you see how much.
It.
So what you don't realize is in that you're in a universe of fear at first, which is why moving is so hard, because when you move to a new country or whatever, you always feel unsettled at first. Yeah, you go like, this is not home. You're always like in a hotel, like literally unsettled in that sense.
You can't read anything, or you can't get information from your outside world. So
it's a constant threat. Yeah. You don't know things, so you're always like this, and you don't realize, but that's pumping 24/7. Yeah. How we not change the way then you look at the world around you, since it's a lot less safe. So that's why people are homesick. They're not homesick. They just want the safety of home. Yeah. When you don't have that safety, you're like, dude, I can't do this every single day, because then the world is constantly unsafe. It's like you have a bear living next to you constantly. Yeah. So that's going to put you into a sympathetic state. You're going to hold water. You're going to those are physiological consequences. Those physiological consequences accumulate, and at some point the body is like, okay, that accumulation is harmful. What is the simplest way to fix that? Let's take an action. Let's not be here. Yeah. Let's go back home. And now you shape your vision of home. You have the best memories that come. I want to see mommy and daddy. You start to have an entire idea of home that is absolutely not correct. Right. But it doesn't matter, because at that moment, that's what you need the world to be. Yeah. Because you're taking an action toward escaping something that is unsettling. But if you can go past that, then you start to get used to it, because the body is like, all right, fuck it, we're here. We're not safe, let's deal with it. And then you start to learn the language. You start to go like, there's a sign I can't read. That's okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's okay. That's okay. And then learn what it means anyway. It means turning left. Okay, I get it. It's not. So then you realize that those signs that you can't read are not saying that much either. Yeah. So you start to bring down the levels, but because you had to take a decision, you have to make an action toward changing the prediction. No, I am not scared just because I don't know things. But at first, it's in the back. It's not really, you can't really know what it is. You don't really know what it is. You just feel it. And eventually, as he gets stronger and stronger and stronger, he starts to come toward consciousness. That's because he's going through the hierarchies. Yeah. At first, it's your heart that beats a little bit faster. You don't even realize it, but it's being faster because this. And then he starts to go through the hierarchies till he gets to the conscious thoughts. And now a decision needs to be taken, because if he goes through hierarchies, it means the shit is real. A decision has to be taken. And you can either make a different world of what it was and go back home, or you just deal with the shit that is here, and then you're doing better. You have changed your vision of the world.
Well, I think also the intent of going to a new place or moving to a new home or moving.
Understanding there will be a stress helps, right?
Yeah,
because you already changed the way you look at the world.
Yeah, but also your motivation. Like if you start a new job out of force, or if you don't want it out, you have to do it to provide for your family, you're going to enter that job with a whole different mindset than when you want to learn something.
Right, so it's funny, like you have prediction versus observation. You have certain parts that are completely unconscious at the heart level, and others that are very much conscious, very much something you can actively participate in on how you shape. Certain system you cannot shape, others you can. And if you look, that's what evolution is giving us, is the capacity to actively change a prediction. Yeah. A snake cannot. A snake, you enter its bubble, it bites. That's just what it does. It only has a sympathetic nervous system. It's only set for one thing. You enter the bubble, I'll bite you. Yeah. Even other snakes or stuff like that. It's very simple. As we have evolved into mammals and now into humans, the system is going toward giving us the bigger and bigger capacity to make conscious decisions toward taking action.
So what we got out of evolution
and changing
is
the prediction.
Learning how to approach things. If I say that correctly, right?
Yep. The capacity to approach things more and more subtly in order to make it work in society, for example.
Yeah.
Yep.
So the approach is almost as possible as I don't measure like that, but
well, if you look at the hierarchy, the 8th hierarchy, the executive control system.
Is that where approach lives?
That's where approach lives, which means, and it's been shown even all the way up to the heart, where you have a negative thing happening, and then all the systems are out of whack. Like if you look at you measure the electromagnetic field of the heart or things like this, and you see all the organs are on different zones. And then when the person is able to take that negative and turn it into a positive and go into that mental zone of like, I'm dealing with it, all the organs get in sync. And then I have the paper showing it. Everything is called coherence, where the heart gets into the same oscillations as the rest of the body, and everything works together as one. And the strongest part of that is that executive control system. It seems it is there for us to be able to take a negative situation, stressful and everything, and turn it into something we can work with, and so problem-solving mechanism. Yeah. But a very subtle and powerful one.
I always like this saying,
which is necessary for a culture.
It's what happens to you doesn't reflect who you are, but how you deal with it reflects who you are. I really like that.
And it seems that's what evolution actually wants to give us, is the capacity to have to change our approach to something. Instead of being more on the reactive side like a snake, we'll be more on the proactive side of like taking a situation and being able to change our approach to it. So being able to shape the universe that we create better. Yeah. That's what evolution is giving us. Like all those universes we create to match to the one around us, we're getting better and better at creating them, and we're getting better at creating them consciously. Yeah. Our capacity to create the universe we live in consciously, our perception, is getting greater and greater and greater. And that's what evolution wants you to do, and that's what we're supposed to work on. Not fall prey to our emotions and our passions, being able to actively change them into what we want it to be for the future. Yeah. That's what evolution is giving us. Yeah. And so when we fall prey to our passions, we work backwards. When we are able to impose our passions where we want, we work forward, which the Stoics have been saying for 2,000 years plus. Yeah. So that's what the executive control network is to bring coherence to the entire system by changing the nature of the universe that we create versus the one we live in. So that's really what the free energy principle, that's as far as you can take it, and you can take it in other places. It goes way further. But
and it's also very interesting how it applies to training. It
applies to training, but it seems to apply to physics as well, which is what the stuff I was talking about yesterday. Like that stuff just keeps on going deeper and deeper. Like there's Do I have time? There's something there's something at play here that relates to intent that is very interesting, because if you look at the executive control network, negative into positive, that's intent. Intent is everything.
Yeah. So, in a way, you can't decide your own happiness, but in a way you can, right? In this way.
That's what it means. Yeah, you make it.
Yeah.
You can. And that's why people that, the camera is showing up. People that have suffered a lot seems to be more capable of happiness than people that haven't. That the people that have not suffered in life seems to be the first one to go.
Yeah.
Anyway, so that'll be enough for this one, but I'll do more on the subject.
Well, I think
in the future.
leaving on this, like starting a new podcast on that note, like people who've been through a lot are more capable of being happy.
We can do that for the next one then.
Yeah.
Sounds good?
It's very interesting.
Cool.
Thank you guys.
Bye guys.
Bye.